Welcome to our live discussion of how I invest my money with my fearless co-editor, Josh Brown, and two friends and contributors to the volume, Christine Benz and Morgan Housel. How's everyone doing today?
Good, happy to be here.
Doing good. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, so this is exciting. The book launches tomorrow. We've gotten some wonderful early press, which I know Josh and I have been a little bit giddy about. It seems like a book about financial advisors and other experts kind of pulling back the curtain on their own portfolios has a little bit of traction. And I'm actually genuinely excited for people to see the book tomorrow when they receive it, whether it be tomorrow or in a couple of days. I've told this story to Josh many times, but my favorite moment over the last few months with this project was just getting the email from any of the contributors saying, hey, my chapter's done. And, you know, like Christmas morning, open it up, what's inside the chapter? And 23 times, because me and Josh and 23 of you, it was like, holy moly. And I would, you know, or Josh would get it first and we'd share it with each other. And
it's true. Brian would say, oh my God, did you just read that?
Yeah.
So we really were excited when we read everyone's chapters.
So why don't we start off with you, Josh, because you were the inspiration for this. This started with a blog that you wrote in the middle of 2019, which at this point feels like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was obviously moved by it, but tell us about the blog that you wrote that inspired the entire project.
Well, so let me back up a little bit. A few years prior to writing that blog post, I had a lunch with a wholesaler. Believe it or not, I still do those. I had a lunch with a wholesaler for one of the biggest index fund families on the planet. I won't say exactly who, so you'll have to guess from among the 500 gigantic index providers. But anyway, he covered the whole Northeast region, so New York, Boston, and a lot of his clients were individuals, but they were individuals who were so large that they may as well have been their own firms. And he said, I always chuckle when I see these famous like hedge fund managers, you know, without being specific, when I see these famous hedge fund managers give interviews about their outlooks on all this stuff, because all their money is with me. I'm like, what do you mean? Like in their fund, they use index ETFs to trade. He's like, no. Their personal money that's not in the hedge fund, the rest of it is always with me. I'm like, who? He's like, all of them. I'm like, can you name names? He's like, no, but just believe me. When you sit at these conferences and it's one hedge fund manager after another, they're all in index funds. So I found that fascinating. So anyway, I had been thinking about that long and hard. When we launched the firm and we brought in a 401k for employees, like one of the first things we said was the 401k has to be invested the way we're telling clients to invest.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to use the same models, the same funds, the same proportional allocation. We have to eat our own cooking. So this has been a topic that's always been on my mind. So last summer, it just occurred to me, like so many people were curious about how I invest my own money, but I never got a chance to talk about it publicly. So I wrote something and I couldn't believe the reaction to it. And Brian, your reaction was, we gotta do this. We gotta do this as a book.
Yeah.
And here we are. And thank God we got people like Morgan and Christine who wanted to reveal their allocations or the ideas behind their allocations in some cases. Christine, you actually use ticker symbols, which I give you props for. People love your chapter. What kind of feedback have you been getting from people? Has it started?
It's been great. The feedback on the whole book has been great. I have to say though, and if you know me, you would not be surprised at this, but I took the assignment like super literally, like this thing is called How I Invest. So I'm going to tell you like specifically like what share class of the American funds new world I have in my 401k plan. So I got super specific. People apparently kind of like that and like my thinking on taxes and so forth. So that was fun. And Josh, I have to say, like, I was just very inspired by your original chapter or your original essay where it was in your description of your house
Yeah.
as one of your biggest investment. And you're like, at the time you wrote the chapter, you're like, we probably won't make any money on the house when we sell it. Now, maybe you think differently, but you were like, so what? And I so appreciated that candor. And I have to say that really informed how I went about writing my chapter. Like I had my own so what areas.
Yeah.
Like we always have sort of a lot of cash in our account because it just never seems like a great time to move it all into the market. So what? You know what? It's provided us a lot of peace of mind over the years. And I think we all make what decisions.
You know what's funny? Like nobody is holding up an efficient frontier in front of the mirror when you look at yourself. Like no one's sketching that Markowitz stuff in front of you. So this is not about the efficient frontier. This is about what do I have to be able to do to get through the next week, month, year, decade, and feel as though I'm in control and I'm happy with the choices that I've made. So my biggest investments are my stake in the firm. Obviously, it's the bet of my lifetime, and my house. And those two things happen to be the most important things. Maybe not in that order, but so like people are like, well, that's not necessarily the right way to do whatever they want to say. It's like, well, it's the right way for me,
Right.
And then you said something, Christine, you said something interesting where you said like, you're not even interested in investing or you're not passionate about it. It's like I thought that's the comment that the most people ask me about, like reporters. Like I was talking to the guys at Investment News. They're like, what does she mean by that? Like, does she hate her? I said, no. She this is her professional calling. She doesn't look at this like an art form, right? Is that what you meant?
Exactly. And, I have to say, like, figuring that out, I knew that in my heart for many years when I was toiling over, fund analysis, which I did for a long time. But it took me a while to get comfortable being like, oh, wait, there's this whole other area of helping investors that's okay to work on too. Like, I don't have to be a genius about allocating portfolios and understanding fundamental analysis to really make a difference in this space. So I have to say, for me, evolving into a role where I felt like I was in more of a helping role within this profession was just a really great direction for me to have taken my career. And it just feels much more authentic to me. I just feel much better about everything.
Okay. Now, Morgan, you are 80% in Tesla.
It's about 85% now. And then the rest in Bitcoin is how it is.
Okay. So it's going well this year.
It's a barbell strategy. I love it.
It's a barbell. Yeah. You got to balance it out a little bit. No, that's not how I invest at all. What I think is interesting about this topic, years ago, I read this article called How Doctors Die. And it was based on this study where they looked at how doctors themselves, when they're in the final stages of their life, what treatment do they want? What treatment do they ask for and do they get? And there's a huge difference between the treatments that the doctors were prescribing their patients and what they did for themselves, particularly for things like cancer. When they were doctors treating patients, they would say chemotherapy, surgery, we're going to throw the kitchen sink at it. When the doctors themselves got the cancer, they would say, just give me the pain meds and let me go. And a lot of the reason that is like, look, the point of this article was there's a big difference between the textbook right answer and what people choose to do for themselves. And obviously the stakes are a little lower, but I think it's the same with finance. Particularly, like if you're on TV or if you're a fund manager or even a financial advisor, by and large, you want to give your clients the textbook right answer. That seems like the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. Here's the textbook right asset allocation. This is what you should do. But people don't, in the real world, they don't make financial decisions on a spreadsheet. They make them like at the dinner table with their family, where all these other things that you cannot model in a spreadsheet come into play for the decisions that you're going to make. It's the same thing that doctors do. It's like the chemotherapy is the right answer, but it's not what they want because risk and reward is a lot more messy than whatever the textbooks say. So I think it's the same in investing. There is some of it in the financial industry that is a little bit cynical. If you have fund managers that don't have any of their net worth in their own funds, like there is some, like there are some things in there.
What's the statistic on that you shared the other day? It's a big number, right?
It's enormous. The number of fund managers that don't have anything in their own fund.
More than half?
Yeah. It's I forget exactly what it is, but it's more than
Christine,
half.
you should remove all of their stars.
Well, we do
notice
negative
stars
when we regress various factors against performance to see like what actually contributes to performance. number one, or what is aligned with performance. Number one, of course, is fees. Number two is very high on the list is manager investment, that there is a correlation between performance and manager investment.
Yeah. So I think many of you, well, some of you might know that Christine and I worked together. She was my first boss at Morningstar. So going back 18, 19 years. And one of the questions you trained me to ask in all of these manager interviews was what's your commitment to your own fund, to the work that you do? To this day, I'm shocked that so many of them said either nothing or less than 10%. And I understand if you're managing a muni bond fund and you're 32 years old, like, yeah, maybe that's not going to map up. But like a lot of people don't invest in their own cooking. And I'll never sort of forget that lesson. So Christine, from your, seat at Morningstar, like why do you think that is? Do you think there's just a story they haven't told or won't tell about how they really invest their money, or what's going on with that dynamic?
Probably a lot of factors, Brian. I mean, you're right that sometimes there might be a mismatch between the fund type. You wouldn't expect a 30-year-old to invest in the target 2025 fund or something like that. But maybe it's just that this has historically been a position where there's been a little bit of job hopping. So maybe there's been some consideration for overdue. I don't know, because, maybe that's part of it, that overdoing their own investment in their funds, might be hard to undo, but it's kind of hard to excuse, I think.
We're actually getting a whole stream of great questions in here. So I'm going to just put some of these out there and you guys dive in. One of them from Jim Hazelwood is, should I ask my financial advisor how she invests or he invests? And I would add to that, sort of, where are the boundaries of propriety? So like how much should you push your own advisor to explain their not just their philosophy, but where their skin is?
Yeah, I think you absolutely should. Why should that be an out of bounds question if they are creating a financial plan for you and ostensibly asking you way more in-depth questions than that? So like it should be a two-way street, but your expectation should not be that your financial advisor has the same portfolio that they're recommending to you, because why would it be the same? You don't have the same exact lifestyle. You don't have the same exact goals. You most likely aren't the same age, and you most likely won't retire at the same time. You don't have the same career risk factors. One of the things that Brian and you and I talked about the other day, I think we were talking to Jim O'Shaughnessy about this, is how many professionals in our industry are holding more cash than what the financial planning software that we use would recommend, that we would personally recommend. And the reason for that is how tethered our compensation is to the ups and downs in the S&P 500. Try as we might to avoid that, it's a reality of people who work in our industry. So it's not hypocritical to have a higher cash balance because of that risk factor that's somewhat unique to people working in finance.
Well, in classic Housel style, he writes a phrase here that I'll probably use forever, which is, cash is the oxygen of independence. Morgan, you want to elaborate on that?
I mean, the whole thrust of my chapter here is all that my wife and I want out of our finances is independence. I don't need to be the best fund manager. I don't need to beat the S&P. Like, none of that matters at all to us. All we care about is waking up in the morning and saying we can do whatever we want today. Yeah. What we want to do is go to work. That's what I want to do. But I want it to be on our terms, doing what we want, when we want, for as long as we want to. That's all that I want out of our money. And that's why, so I write, I have a higher cash percentage of my net worth than I think most financials would recommend. Not crazy high, but a little bit higher. And that's the reason I do it. Like, I'm only interested in independence, not beating the market. And once you get, wrap your head around that philosophy that works for us, then that allocation makes a lot of sense for us. Even if I could not justify it on a spreadsheet, given our age, net worth, time horizon, et cetera, like, it doesn't make any sense on a spreadsheet, but it works for us because our goals are a little bit different than other people's might be. It's also important to say, like, that's our goal, but it might not work for other people. So just because this works for us, I'm not saying this is what other people should do. I think everyone just has to be introspective about who they are and realize that there's so many different ways that you can do this, and everyone has completely different goals and risk tolerances and expectations and whatnot. So just because this works for us does not mean at all that it's going to work for other people. And I think that is the reason why a book like this is something people want to read, because the difference between, again, what is right and what people actually do is so different, because we're all different people. This would be a really easy endeavor if investing were like math and 2 + 2 = 4 for me and Christine and Brian and Josh. Like if it was the same answer for everyone, this would be a simple book. But everyone's so different that they're going to come to different conclusions about what works for them. And I think people are embarrassed of that sometimes, because they do things with their money that aren't textbook. It's not the textbook thing to do. So they're thinking, oh, I'm kind of ashamed of that. And they try to hide it. I just don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. There are things that I do with my money that don't make any sense, that Josh does with his money that's not rational. But if it works for us, like, who cares?
Right. I think there's something both liberating and scary at this about being told, do what you want. So if we all have a shared benchmark, the S&P 500, and that's the collective objective to beat that benchmark, it leads to one direction. But if you say to folks, well, you've got your own life, you've got your aging parents and siblings and kids and community, so like there's no model for that. I want to give each of you the opportunity to brag a little bit on some of the other contributors to the book, because I was just so blown away by some of these chapters. Josh brought some people to the table. I brought some people to the table. Obviously, we kind of share this wonderful FinTwit community. Maybe can we go around the horn, and can you guys maybe talk about a chapter that moved you, especially if it was somebody that prior to the project, you didn't really know the person, it was sort of a new name to you, because introducing some of these voices to the world, because some of these folks are relatively young, I'm just so happy that they're being heard.
I didn't know anything about Josh Rogers prior to you soliciting a submission from him.
Yeah, he's a good friend.
After reading his chapter, I want to read like 3 pages from him every day. Like I love the way he writes, and I actually don't agree with, like, obviously everything that everyone says, and I don't agree with everything that he says, but I just love his point of view and how all or nothing it is, because that's the way I write. I kind of don't leave anyone room to disagree with me when I write persuasively. So I thought that was really cool. You're gonna have to introduce us one day.
Yeah, no doubt. He's a good friend. He lives down the street in Chicago and is a wonderfully successful financial advisor.
Wait, so hold on. So he invented the algorithm
For
that Priceline is based on?
Yeah. And
he sold it to them?
Yeah.
He sold it to like William Shatner?
You know what? When you're in Chicago next, when all the craziness is over, the 3 of us will have a very fun dinner, I assure you.
Okay. All right. Next. Who's next?
I'll go. I read the whole book yesterday for the first time. I had read some of the chapters piecemeal, and there were a few that I really, really loved. So it's hard to pick, but Debbie Freeman, who I do not know except for Twitter. I knew that she's a divorced mom, has two daughters, is a powerhouse financial advisor, which is an impressive combination right there. But I read that she, came from fairly humble beginnings, and her parents were not stock investors. And she considers her best investment that she ever made her education, which is a terrific point, investments in human capital. But she also talked a little bit about her personal story and about how she had a customer. She worked at a diner and served breakfast. And I love this sort of offhand comment that everyone's happier at breakfast, which is kind of true. And she talked about how every day they would walk through a stock pick and talk about it. And he helped her understand the market. But then she went on to talk about a personal story. She had very sort of concrete, straightforward financial goals that she makes, but she also talked about how she had this other bucket that she was saving toward that was her 40-year birthday vacation fund. And she said really early as she was starting her career, she was so busy working and getting education that she really didn't slow down to have fun or do travel or do, a lot of the things that young people do. And so she has sort of had set aside this splurge fund because she lost a brother to suicide. And that made obviously an enormous impact on her life and made her want to seize the day and set aside a fund to really make sure that she enjoys the ride as she goes along. So powerful chapter. I'm really excited to meet Debbie in person because she just seems like an amazing person.
I met her in Colorado. I flew in and spoke to her FPA group. Fantastic advisor, great person. So you'll enjoy meeting her for sure.
Can't wait.
Morgan?
My favorite was from Ted Seides, who I've known for years. I consider him one of my good friends. And I had known this about him, but not the details that he went into in the book, which he was really kind of vulnerable. And he said, look, in 2007, he got divorced and then he lost his job. And it was really trying time for him financially. I just thought good for him. It's so easy in one of these things to, when you're talking about your own finances, put forth a glorious story about all your good decisions. He really opened it up and said, here was the most thing I've dealt with financially and what it taught me about managing money. I thought good for him. It's also so important for everyone. Most people listening to this and reading this book won't have to make that many great decisions over the course of their life to do well financially. They just have to avoid catastrophic blowups at any point in time. If you can avoid the mistakes, you'll probably do just fine over time. And we spend so much time in the industry, whether it's fund management or financial planning, focusing on making good decisions. And I think rather and which is good and it's great, but I think rather than the emphasis on good decisions, there should be more emphasis on avoiding catastrophes in finance. Because if you can avoid that, you'll probably do just fine over time. So I love that Ted highlighted what happened to him during that period, what he learned from it, because it's such an important lesson for all of us. And I was just proud of him for being that open and honest with everyone.
Brian, what was the standout chapter for you?
Man, so two really hit me hard. The first was Desarte Yarnway, who I had known a little bit, and we've become better friends over the last couple years. But I took the first crack at most of the chapters from an editing point of view, and also with due respect to everybody else, Desarte's was one in which I didn't change a single word or make a single suggestion. I think there was a missing comma somewhere. It's such a powerful, earnest, articulate tale of love in a family and how people take care of each other. There was just something so authentic about it. It really blew me away. It's like I
can't believe how young he is.
He's like 29.
It's ridiculous how wise he is. I think back to what I was like when I was his age. I could have made my life so much easier if I had the grasp of these concepts that he has at that age. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, Christine can attest to how stupid I was in my late 20s. Like I wasn't there yet. The second chapter that really blew me away from someone I didn't know at all because she was introduced by Tyrone Ross was Leanne Miko. Again, another story similar to Debbie's where she grew up in humble beginnings. And I don't think, the book's called How I Invest. I don't think she makes a single reference to her portfolio or the stock market over the course of her 5 pages. It's really about security. It's about independence. It's about taking care of others. I'm a sucker for these stories, in movies and literature. And so when they come to me in the real world, in a project like this, especially when she decided on the back of that experience to devote her career to helping others, I find it so inspiring. And one reason
I like this message a lot. If everyone can see that.
Yeah, net worth doesn't equal self-worth.
I mean, no matter how many times you hear that message, it's probably not enough, because every day we have things put in our face that tell us the opposite, right? And even I overheard my kid and his friends talking in the back of my car. I was driving them to or from baseball or something, and they're 11, and they're talking about like who in the town has money, and their only frame of reference to be able to figure that out is what kind of cars people drive.
Yeah.
And but now, of course, I'm very plugged in on all the gossip, so I know the truth. but I'm not correcting anyone, but their take on that, right? I don't even think adults lose that. Like, I don't even think as people get older. So just this idea that net worth and self-worth need to be linked with each other, like at a certain level, that link breaks. And then, I think like we did a really good job in this book. That was a running motif throughout is how little the contributors are really concerned with size and
Mhm.
amounts and magnitude of wealth. And maybe they are concerned with it, but that didn't come through in the way they wrote.
The
Um,
perverse
I think
thing
one
about
one way to emphasize that is that no one in the book tells you their net worth or their income, because it doesn't matter to what you're doing. It doesn't matter to your goals or your, how you're investing.
That's going to be in the sequel. So
that's version 2. You got to pay extra
Yeah.
for that.
yeah.
exactly. That's behind the paywall.
Christine, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the perverse thing about net worth and wealth is the more you have, the less you feel to engage, the less need you feel to engage in those outward shows of wealth, I think. I mean, I never felt more interested in showing off what I had or didn't have when I was younger and had no funds. And it's just sort of a twisted thing, I think. It's really hard to combat.
All the wealthy people where I live on Long Island, on the North Shore of Long Island, they all drive 8, 9, 10-year-old cars. And in some way, that's actually how they tell you what their net worth is, because that's like a style, is to buy a car and drive it forever. And now maybe they have 6 of those, but but I agree with your point, Christine, that the further you get away from that rat race, the more it's, the less you're, showing. So I think that's true. And then, when you say to people like, how do you invest your money? To some extent, you can kind of tell where people are in life, but a lot of that is just a function of how old you are and how many years you've had to accumulate wealth, because you need that ingredient. You need time. So I think that's a component of it also. But with time and with age, you just become more mature, or at least I hope you do, about those kind of outward displays.
Yeah, totally. One question we've gotten in the feed today, and I actually got a couple emails about this over the last few days, was about kids and money and having conversations within a family about money. So Josh, you just told sort of a perfect anecdote that kind of gets into that world of what your kids think rich is. And but for any of you, and Christine, you're in a really interesting seat. You're the head of personal finance for all of Morningstar, which does a fabulous job for 30 years now, teaching generations about the right way to save, spend, invest, and so forth. So open question to any of you on how do you bridge these conversations into a family context, from grandparents to adult children to their kids?
My kids are too young, so I'm going to let others jump in here.
My kids have no conception whatsoever of money. They don't have any chores that we pay them for.
Yeah.
We tell them to do the chores, and this is like just what's expected of you. I'm not paying you to be a member of the household. I don't know, maybe I'm doing that wrong. But my kid will ask me, like, he'll see a Corvette on the road. He'll be like, whoa, that's sick. How much is that? Like $5,000, Dad? I'm like, no, I don't think it's $5,000. I don't know. I'm not at the point where I'm ready to worry about the financial literacy of my kids. They're 14 and 11, maybe in a couple of years, but I'm not even spending the time on it because I don't think they have the context. But that might not be right. Maybe I should be. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't have children, so I guess I can't really weigh in a real sense on how to approach kids. But I will say, reading some of these stories, some of the folks who contributed essays had very fraught experiences with money growing up, and I feel really lucky that I didn't have that. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's the best thing parents can do for kids financially, is just to model like a tranquil home from the standpoint of financial matters. I felt like my parents were always really in harmony on that. My mom didn't work outside the home, but it was always just like not something we talked a lot about, and yet college was paid for and weddings were paid for, and like just wasn't a lot of fuss about it. And I have to say I really internalized that from them and feel grateful for that.
I think that's the modeling point's a really important one. And so I have 3 teenagers, including one that's off to college next year. And so it's one thing to, teach financial literacy, and stocks and bond. Like I don't think 14-year-olds should be learning much about the stock market anyway. Most people should just have a barbell portfolio between Tesla and Bitcoin, like Morgan has. Just kidding. But one thing that Tracy and I do a little bit, there's boundaries, but we try to have transparency over some of our financial decisions. So whether it be, a simple example is we like
Transparency for who? For the kids' benefit, you mean?
for the kids' benefit. So how much
Okay.
does something cost? I haven't
Oh, we
shown
have the
them.
opposite of that. Go on. This is interesting. So you tell them how much you're paying for stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so, like we take nice vacations. It's like our family passion. All 5 of us love it. And they're now at the age where they know how much a plane ticket costs and a hotel costs and what the trade-offs are between staying at one type of place versus another. If you're going to do an excursion here versus there. And like, Tracy and I might have already in our minds decided which way we wanted to tilt, but we'll share with them what the trade-offs are. And there might be situations where you take one fork and it's 3 times the cost of taking the other fork, and the kids begin to just see trade-offs, and we're not hiding anything. We show them the brochures, and nothing major, but just letting them in on like what things sort of cost, and why mom and dad have to make trade-offs because we just can't afford everything. So if we have this, we can't have this. What do you think about that?
Do you get intelligent reactions to that from them? Like, do they
Oh,
start to
they
demonstrate
don't even look up
preferences?
from their phones. So
Yeah,
it's
that's what I was gonna say. That's why we're not. That's why we're not bothering. I'll give my daughter Morgan's book maybe, and see
Yeah.
if I can get her to read a couple chapters, because I think she would love it. But how do you get them to read the first page? That's the hardest. That's the hardest
Yeah.
part.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to turn to your guys' reactions to Carl's drawings. I just think that like his participation takes this book to the next level, makes me even more excited about it. And for those who haven't heard the story, Carl was in the first batch of people that Josh and I called to participate in the project, and he's like, "Oh, that's a great idea, sure." And then he calls me 2 weeks later, and he's like, "You know what? I don't want to write anything. Maybe I'll just draw one of my classic pictures." I'm like, "Great, classic picture." And then he calls back 2 weeks later, and he's like, "I don't even want to do that." I'm like, "All right, Carl, best of luck to you. See you around." He's
Right.
like, "But I have another idea. Why don't I read everybody else's chapter and draw my interpretation of what the idea that they're trying to capture?" I was like, are you kidding? Like, yeah, great. That's 25 times the work. He's like, yeah, but
Yeah.
it'll be fun. And Josh can attest to the behind the scenes process. He and I, we edited things, we sent them off to Carl, we got drawings back, and we would do Zoom calls or text or whatever. And we were like, I can't believe this is happening, because I thought he did such a beautiful job on basically everybody's chapter. Josh showed Leanne's chapter.
Yeah. This is another good one.
Yeah.
So this is Cheryl Penny.
Yeah.
And Cheryl has one of the most inspirational stories of the book. He was basically an orphan in a small town in Maine, and lost his parents when he was a kid, and basically was raised by the town, like just moving house to house. His grandfather was around, and he now is the founder and CEO of one of the largest platforms in our industry. Dynasty is, I think, 50 billion in assets, 27 firms. Every week they're announcing billions more dollars coming onto his platform. And, he really kind of did this on his own, so yeah, I love that. I love that drawing, because it's about like the buckets that he uses, and he considers some of these things investments. He's investing in fun. He's investing in personal stuff and giving. When he gives money away, which he does often, given his background, he considers it an investment. It's not an investment that has a dollar ROI on his portfolio, but it's got a deeper return for him. So I like that drawing a lot. What were some of the other good ones?
I mean, so what I love about Carl too is that, to me, the best writing is saying the most amount of stuff in the fewest words possible. That's what good writing is.
Yeah.
And Carl does that just in a picture. Like, he doesn't even need 4 sentences to say. You just get it instantly. And that's what people love about it. It's so simple, but it makes a point that, like, you get
How perfect
instantly.
that is. Yeah. To your point, look at this.
Christine, that's your,
That's Christine's.
I love that. And I guess this is a Carl fan club, but I've just loved getting to know Carl over the past couple of years, especially, and love the way he's kind of taken his career, where his focus is on sort of financial life planning, much like yours, Brian.
He's worldwide. He's in London now. He lives in
New Zealand,
lives in England. Yeah.
He's living
like a
it.
Sade song.
But yeah,
really
the
is.
illustration for my chapter is really just exactly how it's felt, in that it's this sort of steady trajectory, no drama really, which is by design, and just, slowly but steadily through, like, staying employed, investing regularly.
That's
has
what a
worked.
401k should look like, that pattern that he drew. That's what it really should look like, because those steps up aren't market activity, they're contributions.
Right.
And then the market activity is kind of like fluctuating on the way up, more so than the stair step. But the steady contributions should look like stairs and be, equal to the one before and the one after. So I love that picture.
I'm going to hold this one up just because we all love
Seawright.
Bob Seawright. He's a good friend to all of us. And his chapter, which everyone will find out tomorrow, is only about a lake cottage that he has in his family. There's sort of a sarcastic footnote about, yeah, I own a diversified portfolio of whatever, but the investment that means the most to us across 3 or 4 generations now, because he's got 3 kids and I think 8 grandkids, and he's the loveliest of men. And it's about how they've invested in a house that they can't winterize, that's falling apart, but brings together all of the things that they love, which is kind of family and community and faith. And, so he talks about his why, and the how. He's like, it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
He's great.
Bob is a great guy.
I guess last question for me, and you guys can certainly chime in. A consistent theme across the book was investing in human capital, investing in yourself. And I think, Josh, I don't know, were we talking to Jim O'Shaughnessy or maybe it was Cameron Passmore the other day about how, the investment stuff over time, it's unpredictable. It sort of works itself out unless you're taking extreme risks, and then it's either great or it's lousy. But the investments in yourself that you make, it's in your control, and it has a measurable impact. And all of us mentor younger folks, and I know personally, I try to share with them that human capital development or investment is much more important than figuring out or cracking the code to the market. Blair Duquesne wrote a great chapter about how she invested in her practice. Lizetta Rainey Braxton, the entire chapter was about investing in herself. You kind of saw this consistently. Because it's such an important piece of advice for everyone, especially people in the front half of their career. Any of you guys want to chime in on kind of what it means to invest in yourself?
Well, not to end this on a negative note at all, but I went on TikTok 2 weeks ago and no, this is like dead serious. I went on TikTok 2 weeks ago, as I am wont to do. And in like 30 seconds, I basically said, the stock market is here to keep you rich. The way you're going to get rich is by investing in your own skills and talent and knowledge base and professional development. And then you're going to use the stock market in the background to grow that wealth. And that's how this whole thing works. And people flipped out. Like, people are so angry at hearing that, and it makes no sense to them because they started investing in April and they're up 80%. And so I have this theory that this new generation of investors is going to be unadvisable for like a few years.
Hmm.
Like how do you sit across the table from somebody as a young financial planner focused on millennials, or, like, that's like, if you're a young financial planner, you're focused on millennials because you have no choice. Like, people who are 30 years older than you don't really want your advice. Fine. So how do you sit across from this generation and talk to them about long-term average annual returns of 7.5% after inflation in a 60-40 portfolio? And they're like, I made 7.5% this morning. What are you talking about? I make that every morning. All I do is when the market's red, I buy Chinese electric battery stock, and I make what you're telling me in a year, I make it in 2 hours. Well, these people are going to be unadvisable. Anyway, they haven't bought in yet to the idea that the right thing to focus on investing in is professional development and skills and networking and going to events where they can meet people. Like, that's the best investment. They're not there yet. They think the best investment is like DraftKings. So it's gonna be a while. I think it's okay, but I was shocked at the amount of delusion that I encountered.
A question for the panelists about this. Do you think that people need to make mistakes to get started in investing? Do they need to start with stocks, like with things that give them the really visceral sense of like, I won, I lost? And are mistakes essential, or can you tell someone, well, invest in this diversified basket of low cost index funds and just don't bother it? I mean, I feel like I would do that if someone told me to, that's how you should do it. I would listen.
I think skinning your knees, especially early on, is really good. Getting a sense of where your risk tolerance is and what's uncomfortable. I'm sort of like Christine. I've never really been into the stock market. Don't buy stocks. I know Josh has some great stories about some of his early experiences and where he built up some calluses. But I think without mistakes, you're not going to be as good. The problem is you don't want to invite mistakes. You don't want to just go lose money for the sake of it. So,
The other
having
problem is
mindset.
the wrong personality types, though, Brian. Like, they could take the wrong lesson from mistakes. They could say this. They could become conspiracists. Like, this whole thing's rigged. The stock market stole my money. No, you just did something inadvisable. No, it's rigged. I was right. The market was wrong. JP Morgan is manipulating the price of silver, whatever. Like, and then that could turn you off from a lifetime of investing. So I think it's like there's a personality issue in there.
Yeah.
There's this great point that Jason Zweig has made where people learn too precise a lesson from their mistakes. So the example he always uses is after the 2000 .com crash, the lesson that a lot of people learned was don't buy .com stocks. They didn't learn about the cyclical nature of markets and bubbles and all of it. They just learned a very specific lesson. And a lot of those people took their money, went straight into real estate, Miami condos, because they learned a very precise lesson that didn't stick with them. Of course, it's great if you can learn your lessons vicariously, but you're also not going to have the emotional scar tissue that someone who went through it did. So if there is a silver lining to the Robinhood surge over this year, it's that maybe it's great that people are going to learn these lessons, the lessons that are going to come from this early on in their life. Like, learn it when you're 21 rather than when you're 48 and trying to put your kids through college.
And the dollar amounts are smaller now.
Exactly. Right.
And Morgan, you've made the point so many times eloquently in your recent book, throughout your blogs over the years, about just the historical context in which people, make their decisions. So if you, sort of grew up during the Depression, there was a certain culture of investing or non-investing. If it was in sort of, roaring bull markets in the 80s and 90s, one of my jokes is that my dad's only skill as an investor is that he was born in 1942. Like, it just so happened that his prime, like, earning and saving and investing years were from like 1982 to late 1999.
Yeah, and obviously that we have no control over. I do think there's a thing that if you are kind of in the mid-millennial group and you started your career around 2008, that is the cohort that's going to be really scarred by what's happening in 2020 as well, because now you have a group who exited college right into the teeth of the financial crisis. But it was easy back then. It was easy in 2008 to say, this is a once in a century event. This is terrible, but this is not going to happen again in my life. I got to put up with this and then we'll move on. It won't happen again. Now that something worse happened in 2020, now I think you're going to have a whole generation that says, this is just how the world works. Every 10 years, the world completely falls to pieces. And since that's all they've ever known, they didn't experience the glory of the 1990s and whatnot. All they've ever known is 2008 and then a slow recovery and then 2020. That, in my view, has a chance of creating like the generation that went through the Great Depression and then World War II. Like so much trauma during your formative years that it sticks with you forever. So I think like already it's not like necessarily how bad 2020 has been. It's 2020 mixed with what happened in 2008. That's going to scar.
What does that do though? Like in your opinion, what does that do for this generation of investors? Does it give them a more durable mindset about what could potentially happen because of how out of the blue this thing was?
I think there are probably some silver linings. Like, will they be less willing to go into huge amounts of debt, less willing to swing for the fences in a dangerous way? Maybe. I think that would be obviously a positive consequence to come from this, particularly around student loans and burying yourself in $250,000 in debt when you're 18. I think particularly like if you're watching your friends go through college right now, like if you're a high schooler right now and you're watching your friends go into a ton of debt to take some Zoom courses from their parents' basement, like that's going to be so unappealing to you now that maybe this is a straw that breaks the camel's back on the debt, on the student loan issue. That's been such a major dynamic for that generation over the last 20 years. So I think there could be some positive things from it. I mean, the generation that went through, yeah.
No more snow days.
That's a big thing.
Now it's Zoom school. What do you mean snow day? Sit down in your chair. We know how to do this now. So we're not taking away vacation days anymore.
Right.
I actually read an article the other day that there was some school district, I forget where it was, that said we're still going to obey snow days this year for everyone's sake. Even though everyone's at home, you can still take a snow day off.
Oh, the servers might get covered in ice. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway,
Brian, why don't you wrap us?
Yeah. So we're 45 minutes in. This is, I think, the perfect bookend to the conversation. We had a huge group on here. Thank you so much to Christine, Morgan, Josh, my fearless co-editor. We really can't wait for everybody to have the book, whether it's print or digital. Enjoy the chapters. Write that 5-star review on Amazon.
There's an Audible. There's an Audible coming out too.
Oh,
I don't even think people know.
There is an Audible, and every author chose their favorite celebrity. I've got Al Pacino from Scent of a Woman screaming hoo-ha.
And you got Laura Linney for me, so we're all set there.
There we go.
I got Martin Shkreli for me. So
yeah. Well, there's only one movie star on the call, and he'll
guys, on behalf of all of the contributors to the book, and Brian and myself, and our publishers at Harriman House and Carl, just want to say thank you so much for the unbelievable outpouring of support. And stop buying Morgan's book. Our book is out now. Morgan's book is very October. This is the new hot thing.
He's got to move on from it.
But if you buy them both, you will be twice as well versed in these concepts, because Morgan's book is a perfect complement to ours and vice versa. So don't be shy. But thank you all, and we appreciate it so much. I can't even tell you.
Thanks everybody.
Fun. Take care. See ya.
Bye, Christine. Bye, Morgan. Thanks, guys.